what's going on everyone? It's Kofi Josephs. I'm back with the Why Not I podcast, the WODCAST. Got a special guest with me today. Trigger warning, today's episode might be a little bit touch and go for people who are feeling like a certain type of way or might have experienced something. So I'm just going to put a little trigger warning at the very beginning of this video. We're talking about domestic abuse, domestic violence, stuff like that. Because right now it is Domestic Abuse Awareness Month, so we just want to spread a little bit of awareness and spread word and try and give support to anybody in any way possible. So yeah, today we've got a special guest with me. Got Mrs. Allie Crewe, photographic artist. And as you can see, some of her work behind us. And throughout the video, I'm going to be posting some of her amazing work also. But yeah, how are you doing?
Good.
Great. So, for people that don't know Allie Crewe, who would you say Allie Crewe is? Because we had a little bit of a conversation a couple of weeks ago, and it was refreshing. Do you know what I mean? It was refreshing because a lot of people think certain type of ways nowadays, but it's just nice to talk to like a free thinker. Do you know what I mean?
I'm a free thinker. I suppose, and no one's ever asked me who I am. I mean, I kind of normally go, I'm a photographic artist. I'm a woman who wants to be part of a change, I guess. I think art can be an agent of change. People tell me I think outside of the box, but I think I have trouble thinking inside of the box. I just don't think my brain's configured that way. Yeah, so it's nice being freelance. I fit in my own world.
Yeah, definitely. And the thing is that being freelance isn't for everybody because a lot of people are raised to be within a system.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like to be a sheep and follow other people. But if you can go against the norm, but then there's a lot of stress that can come with that as well. Do you know what I mean? Because if everybody, even the system, wants you to go a certain way, you go in against the status quo.
Yeah.
Unless you're really like driven and strong, it's really easy to kind of be pulled over that way or feel like you're going the wrong way, even though it might be the right way for you.
Yeah, and I think as an artist, you know, a big part of my work is having that voice and being brave enough to use it and knowing that I'm definitely not going to be everyone's cup of tea.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's and that's okay because it's more important to be true to myself, really.
Definitely. How did you get to that point? Because that alone, to me, I'd class it as a success because it's really hard to get there and stay there because the world doesn't really want that.
No.
Do you know what I mean? And even your loved ones, because they're so used to the way the world thinks and because the majority are doing it doesn't necessarily mean it's right for everyone. How have you been able to realise that's you and stay there and remain in that?
It's hard. So I used to lecture in FE, so I come from a media film background, and I just wondered if, as my daughter grew up, I wondered if there was anything inside of me that that just meant I could go freelance. I honestly didn't know. I think, you know, when you're a mum, even though you're working, I was working part-time, you're kind of invisible in your job as well. And I went back to night school and I just felt, I can still feel it, I just feel that there's just something inside that I want to get outside. And I had no idea that I was an artist. I mean, I just thought I will do some commercial photography. So my background was much more commercial. And then this piece up here, this hung in the Getty in London. And that was 5 years ago in May, and I came home, and it was like 2 mornings later, and I just thought I have to just leave. I have to leave my job. And I phoned my friend and boss at work and just said I'm leaving, just going. And then it's terrifying. It's terrifying because you've got nobody to rely upon. You know, it's like, you are just out there by yourself. There's no team. You have to totally rely on your own resources.
It's crazy because you don't realise how much you don't know.
No.
Until you're just out there alone. You're like, wow, there really is like a safety net of being in the system.
And a salary and sick pay and the status of having, you know, a certain job. So people, and you have to really let go of all of that. Yeah, you have to let go of, you know, your ego. I think I've become much more humble because I know when we first met, we were in the gallery, weren't we, looking at my new exhibition, and I remember just thinking there's I think humility grows because every time I hand work, that is my soul on the wall. You know, as a portrait artist, there are two people in that frame. There's me and the person sitting in front of my camera, and the connection and what happens in that moment. And in order to get someone to, you know, really open up and kind of be unguarded, I feel I have to meet them there, and that's a more ethical way of working rather than, you know, the traditional power play of a photographer going in and taking the image they want. It has to feel like a collaboration, and that people are giving me what they wish to show or what they want to have witnessed in themselves. So it's just an act of faith. Every time I pick up a camera, I have no idea whether I can make that happen or not. You know, you've got to kind of trust that there is a gift that you've had lent to you and treat that with respect. Yeah.
How do you know when you've got it there? Do you know what I mean? Because every single time, depending on the individual that you have, everyone's story is different. So getting that shot is different every single time. It's not like you're aiming for something, but it's like, is it like a feeling or?
So I focus on a person's left eye and I'm right. So I'm looking and I'm like right in that eye. And there is just a moment when someone trusts you, and I get like a bolt of energy. It's literally like someone goes straight into my solar plexus, and you know, sometimes I try and remain quiet with that, and other times I'm just jigging on the spot. It's like, oh my god, that was amazing, and it can't stay still. Yeah, we feel it.
That's amazing. So the exhibition that I came to was with the NHS. And that was amazing. Was it? Tell us a little bit about that exhibition that you did, because a lot of people know about the NHS in this country, but they don't know about the NHS in this country. And I think even it was an eye-opener to me when you was telling me this person does that, this person does that, that's this person's story. And I was like, wow, because we just think NHS as health service, not individuals. Like my doctor or my nurse is a person that has a life. Do you know what I mean? And no matter what's going on in their life. So what was it like for that project?
So I've shot that in over 3 years, and they're all black ethnic minority leaders, but not all leaders in the traditional sense. Sometimes they are very senior in their post, like the CEO, Owen Williams. And sometimes they're inspirational because they're leaders within the community. So the NHS comes under Northern Alliance, which meant I went to a mosque and I met a fabulous imam and nurses who, you know, it's like some of them are inspirational for what they do. So there's a real variety of people there. And I think there's a lot of false positivity when you work for a big organisation, and it's political to tell your boss that everything is actually pretty good, and that you know the world is less racist, and and especially when your boss is white, and Owen Williams isn't. He has a massive agenda about seeing more people of colour in senior leadership roles. So I just, I've been going out to people's workplaces, I've been in operating theatres, in hospitals, in mosques, it's like you name it, they just send me out. And people wanted to tell what it was really like. And so the stories are, they're really mixed. People, I think they felt they could speak up because I'm outside the NHS.
Yeah.
And it's a different experience when you sit down with someone and they kind of say, like, what's it really like?
Yeah.
There's a real urge to tell. And it's called Still I Rise. The stories are on my website, so go and read, what people wrote. Obviously, there's a selection of portraits there. And if you want to see them for real, you have to go to where we met, which is Salford Art Gallery on the Crescent. And it's hanging there for the whole of Black History Month till early December.
Oh, right, amazing, definitely. I think I'll go back actually and see them like on the wall, because I was there when it was like it was being prepared and stuff.
Yeah, they were all over the floor, weren't they?
And it was like not sure of like different selections and placements and stuff, but seeing it hung up, it's just different, because like even the eyes in some of the photos were like catching me, where I was like, what's this person's story? What's that person's story? Do you know what I mean? And it's crazy how a portrait can say so much without saying so much.
Yeah, but I know it's a cliche, but we do say, don't we, that a picture can tell a thousand words. And I think it's cliche, but it's true. But you just described curiosity. That, like, what is that person's story? And you don't need to literally look up that person's story. Maybe what you find is something in yourself, don't you, when you look at it? Yeah.
It's amazing, and that's what I think, like, portraits, certain types of photography is supposed to do, like what it does for me anyway. So you've done that project over such a large span of time, and you also do other pieces of work where you take pictures of, is it people that have been part of domestic abuse, domestic violence? Tell us a little bit about that, because that's intense work. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, so the NHS work was commissioned, but the work on domestic violence, which is called I Am, is personal work that then, after I had kind of made something from it inside myself, then that was commissioned by Sick Festival and Save Lives. And I worked on that one, the whole project, for two and a half years. And they wanted a certain part of the project, which is quite tight shots of people on a green backdrop that was upholstery fabric. And kind of a way of signifying the home and giving the whole series some unity. And then that opened in May 2022. It was opened by the new Queen Consort, so she brought a kind of, if you have a royal person open your exhibition, it brings the national press. And although I wouldn't say I was a fan of the royal family, Camilla certainly did a really great, respectful job, and she works very closely with Safe Lives. Yeah, so it wasn't just a one-off, it's been a commitment she's had over a number of years, which was pretty amazing. She brought the national press and TV, and I've just never experienced anything like that before.
That must have been wild. For people that don't know, what is Safe Lives?
Safe Lives they're a domestic abuse charity, but they're not a frontline provider, so it's not like Women's Aid where they run refuges and things like that. They're more a think tank who do research into domestic abuse, and then they advise the police, the judiciary, the government. They're kind of policy makers, and they look at what changes we have to make as a society, and then devise training programs. So currently, I know Sharon Baker, the senior police officer whose image hung in May. She is currently training Somerset and Avon Police.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so she's involved in it. They've been training all over the country. It's been massive. We
What?
have to improve the way the police respond to domestic abuse.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. So from all the work that you've done, because like your projects aren't like 2 weeks, 2
No.
days, they're like
They're
a
years.
long span of time. What did you learn about domestic violence in that time? Because it's not like you just meet these people and take a photo. You get to know them. Because you have to connect through lens. You have to connect in another way. Like what?
Well, I
do you learn?
still know a lot of them, so there's that sense of creating a tribe, really, and I still talk to them. So after this interview, I've got to dash off, and I've got a meeting with one of the women who sat for me. Even though the exhibition's out, we're hoping it will tour next year, but many of those people have become friends. What did I learn? I think I started off thinking that I just did not understand domestic abuse. So I grew up with it, and it felt normal, because I think your experience of your own family just feels like
That's
this. Yeah, and it's as an adult I started to. I don't think I actually recognised that it was domestic abuse until maybe 3 years ago.
Wow.
And partly that's contextualised by the 70s and 80s, in that giving your kids a good hiding was considered normal discipline, and I just assumed that other parents fought, as and it's difficult to know what goes on behind closed doors. And I didn't understand perpetrators. Like, why would somebody employ coercive control, financial control? And I have a friend who survived the Holocaust, and I constantly asked her, like, why did the Nazis do? And it's such a similar idea of kind of psychological terror, isn't it? So I started off loads of research and development, because of course COVID happened, so I couldn't go out and shoot immediately, and interviewed loads of psychiatrists and psychologists and people working in the field, and I just, even when they could answer my questions, I would say, what is sadism? Why do people enact sadism on other human beings? And they give me papers to read. I still didn't understand. I just could not feel it inside. And then when COVID permitted, I had Arts Council funding, so I went out all around the country in my car, and people told me stories, and I started to see patterns, and I started to understand it wasn't just my family, and there's an enormous comfort in not just reading about something, but actual, like sitting down with someone and them telling you a story. And eventually, I think I stopped feeling so traumatized and started to just find more peace, really. So that's
Really?
what,
That's really interesting, that is. So, what did domestic violence then mean to you as that time went on? Because you went from thinking it was normal to not understanding, to trauma, to the current state of more understanding and not being traumatized. What did it then mean to you at the end of the project? Because I'm sure you had a lot of individuals as well. It weren't just it wasn't just women, was it?
No, I wanted to make sure that I photographed people in same-sex relationships, men, a couple of trans people as well, because obviously my previous body of work was about transgender non-binary community, and I kind of feel it's ethical, not to, you don't just parachute in, photograph a community and then leave. It feels, it's better to stay connected, I think. The ending was horrible.
Really?
I hadn't dealt with my stuff.
Okay.
Not really. So we opened in May, and then 2 weeks later my second exhibition opened, so May was insane. And then in June I felt empty. It was horrible. I think that's when I started kind of start to stop it being about the participants, there are about 50 or so, and bring it back to like my own family and process my own feelings. So I've been having some EMDR. It's really great for trauma therapy. It's really brutal as well though. And a lot of I do a lot of yoga practice that's about somatic release, and people started coming into my life, and I'd photograph someone and then they'd say, I'm a Reiki healer and I want to give you a session. So I just started saying yes.
Yes,
thinking,
say yeah.
Just say yes, yeah. Which wanted to give, and it's like, you just say yes, because it's like, and now I need some time to heal and process my own stuff as well. Because my father died a week after I decided to make this work, very unexpectedly. So that was January 2019, no, December 2019, yeah. And it's a complicated grief when the person who died is not a great person, but also when your world tilts, so I thought my mum was a victim and my father was a perpetrator. I thought that was what happened, but it isn't always, sometimes when people are very codependent, it gets quite blurred, and I think my mum's also a perpetrator. So, that was a lot to process. Yeah, and most of the summer I've been making work about healing, just experiments. And I kind of felt like I got famous for a bit. It was quite nice to just slip into obscurity. Yeah. I've had a rough summer, to be honest. I can't make work like that without it taking a lot out of me.
100%. That's why I was asking in terms of your mental health and stuff, because you have to be connected to this. Like, unless you're like a robot, there's no way you can sit with 50 people who have been through extreme circumstances and not feel. Do you know what I mean? You probably can't talk about certain things that individuals have said, but like, was there anything across like the range that really made you like open your eyes? Because you said you saw a pattern, and a lot of people nowadays, if they're not in tune to domestic abuse or domestic violence, it might be right in front of them, like in public, and they're not in tune to like even picking up on it, like a guy grabbing his woman when she says she's going to the toilet, or like, where are you going, who's that calling, just little stuff like that. Do you know what I mean? Like, was there anything that you saw as like a common theme?
I think whether it was about physical violence or coercive control, sexual control, financial control, there's a certain pattern. So some of the people I photographed had survived murder attempt and had been left with life-changing injury, and those were really hard shoots. And some had a family member murdered.
Wow.
So I photographed Ryan and Luke Hart. Their story's out there, so this isn't indiscreet, but their father murdered their mother and sister. And there were a number of kind of those situations. They're really hard to sit with. But one of the people I photographed is Samantha Beckinsale, the actress.
Okay.
And she was telling me recently that when the perpetrator acts, there's a kind of a pattern. Now, I don't quite understand this yet, so, sometimes people tell you things, but you're like, I'm not quite ready to read that.
Yeah.
But very systematic behaviour, and Sharon Baker, the police officer, was saying the same thing. It's almost like there was a handbook, and it's not until and I think I have to face what the perpetrators do, and I think I need to read, that kind of handbook of psychological
Mhm.
approach, because we shouldn't ignore it, should we? But I'm kind of bite off the bit I can chew that day,
Yeah.
you know.
Definitely. I bet that's tough because, like, as I've started doing my own research and learning more about it and meeting individuals who are in it still
Yeah.
or have just left, like it's wild when you meet people who are still in it, and then you also meet people at the same time who have left it, and the person who's in it kind of realizes but doesn't really realize, but then the person who's left it is, and they don't know each other, is literally saying word for word what that person's going through, and probably will go through, and you're kind of like, how? Because the perpetrator is from a completely different walk of life and everything. Like, how is it so step by step? Especially the financial control. It's insane.
It's. Do you know why I think we don't face it? Because it is very bizarrely systematic, and I say the handbook, but there is no handbook. And this is something about human nature. I don't think perpetrators study how to do it.
I don't think so either.
I think that it's the darkness inside. There are people, maybe we all have that darkness, but there are people who feel very pulled to it. We know that perpetrators have often experienced some form of abuse, but then we're adults and then we have a choice, don't we? You know, I experienced a great deal of abuse, and the domestic abuse was only part of my childhood. You can look on my website and read some of the journal photo essays, but I think ultimately as adults we have to be responsible for how we behave. So, you know, I feel like, right, you're 18 or you're 21, now you have to choose. You have to choose how you're going to live your life, and if you repeat patterns that are negative, you end up with intergenerational trauma, and you know you become that person, and
Pass it on.
but also we're responsible for how we live our lives, aren't we, and the impact we want to have on people around us. And it sounds corny to say I'd rather practice kindness as a kind of, you know, like it's like a yoga practice, isn't it? It's like saying, you know, every day I will practice meditation, I will practice yoga, I'll practice kindness. I'll try and do something in the world that makes a difference to help other people.
The thing is, it sounds cliche until you actually come face to face with how dark the world can be.
The
like
darkness, it just bothers me.
Like
you know, you just think like,
like you know when you're not witnessing bad stuff and people are like, yo, and you're like, oh, it's not that bad out there. When you come face to face with how bad it is out there, it doesn't sound so cliche with your practice kindness, because people are really out here experiencing misery day in and day out, especially when you've got, like, when you're connected through children. It's not like, oh, just leave.
No.
It's
you're stuck together
forever. You're like, it's wild, because like you don't want to take away a parent from the child, or I've heard a lot of, they're a great parent but they're terrible to you, and it's like, what are they teaching to the child? I'm not sure
they're a great parent.
That's what I've said.
Yeah, it's kind of like,
you know what I mean? But then I'm like, I'm not in it, so it's like trying to get that person help. But it's also, what I've found with going down a domestic violence like route is, what I found tough, especially from certain conversations, is it's very generic, especially being a man, to hear something's happening to a woman you love or a family member, and it's just go beat the guy up. That's the generic, like, just go beat him up. But what do you then do? She keeps going back to him or something like that. Like, how do you?
You can't choose what someone else does.
Do you know what I mean?
So when a person returns to a perpetrator, that's a really complex psychological thing. They normally do not understand, whilst they're in it, what it is that they're doing. They often believe, because we're talking about a kind of brainwashing
Pretty much.
where so the person who's a victim will often believe it is their fault and that they can change or help their perpetrator. They love their perpetrator. They don't see them as perpetrator. It's just, I think if you haven't been there, and I haven't been there, it's like we can't judge a person who is in that place, can we really? You shouldn't go and beat up the perpetrator. I think the point should be you should support the woman you mentioned. You know, it's saying, what can I do? How can I just be here for you?
Yeah.
If you want to talk, I am here. Very few people leave a violent relationship without a friend to pull them out, but they won't come out till they're ready. So you just always have to let them know you're there. There's no point trying to convince someone that the person they love is a perpetrator. They just don't see it. But then hopefully will come a point where that person wishes to leave, and then you have to say, I'm here to help. You know, tell me what you need. Don't judge and tell them what they need. Because the reason why the work was called I Am is because people, when they have no identity, the self-identity is eroded. The idea of self-choice or even knowing your own belief and value system is all removed. So the participants liked the idea it was I am, I am.
Creating a new identity.
Yeah, you have to start from scratch. And some people are just empty when they leave that relationship. They're
empty during it as well.
Yeah. And that doesn't matter whether the victim is, and I'm saying victim at this point, it's not a word I normally use. I think even survivor's a bit contentious, but I think when you're in the relationship, you're probably a victim at that point. And yet you are actually surviving, aren't you, day to day? So the language is difficult to use.
When you talk about coercion and stuff like that, for people that aren't aware, because a lot of people think that when they think of domestic violence, it's just hitting, stuff like that. But
I think a lot of women believe if they're in a relationship with coercive control, they don't see it because domestic violence is when he hits you.
What would, from your research, I've actually been in the field and talking to the people who've experienced it. It's a little different to a psychologist or someone writing about it. But enough people talking about coercive control, like it's different when they're in it, where they're like, this is what they've done. And then with 50 people who don't know each other are saying pretty much the same thing, to me that's real, like a real definition of coercive control. Like, what did you find that was? Because obviously we can understand financial control, taking money, but even that's, they do a sneaky way of that too, of just don't work today, I'll give you money for today, how much would you
it looks like
today?
Kindness.
So
it's
slick.
confusing.
But what is coercive control from what you've
I don't know. I don't think I'm an expert, and it's kind of hard to define things like that. We know that coercion isn't something that happens against your will, but you've just said it's so subtle. It's very if you want to isolate someone from their family, you don't say, oh, you should stay away from your mum and dad and your brother's horrible. You say things like, I just don't feel they appreciate you. What they just did was, I didn't speak to you like that. And so it's like, but I mentioned Samantha Beckinsale, she's just about to launch a film she's narrated called Love, and I think there'll be a preview screening in November, and I'm not quite sure where it will be distributed, but maybe that's something. It's like, there's it's kind of just a dramatization of a voice describing coercive control, really. So maybe you look there.
Yeah, definitely. So, what do you think could be the fight against it, because it really is a fight, because it's the rate it's happening more and more, because more people are having children and passing on these learned behaviours that after 20 years you will think it's normal, because that's how the brain works.
Yeah.
And then they're having children, they're passing it on. Now it's 4 generations of thinking a behaviour is normal. So it's definitely a fight. From the individuals you've spoken to who have got support and survived and managed to be out of it, what have they said is something that could help or would have helped?
I don't know. There are probably lots of different answers, but and it's hard sometimes to speak for other people, isn't it? I'm always cautious. It's like,
or what did you
when I talked to Save Lives initially, the idea that appealed was, if you wanted, people said, do you want to raise awareness of domestic abuse? And I was thinking, no, I do not. Awareness it's not enough.
Yeah.
And so if art is an agent of change, then I have to figure out how I can make work that might get people to question behaviour. And Save Lives and I had a similar idea, which was we have to talk about men and boys. So it's about toxic masculinity and the extent to which we think toxic masculinity is okay. That male violence is okay. People say rape is a woman's problem, but it isn't, because women don't rape. And I think we take the same idea with domestic abuse. We'll quite often say, well, it's her problem, she needs to get out, but he needs to stop. And I'm gendering it because with most serious cases of domestic abuse, when they're sustained or they involve serious injury, it is a male upon female behaviour, which is not to say that that it does not affect men. It does. So I have to be quite cautious about that one. But yeah, we have to challenge toxic masculinity, and it doesn't work for men. There's a group in society who dominate, and it works for them. But the male suicide rate is so high. Toxic masculinity doesn't work for most men. It certainly doesn't work for women and children.
Definitely, I think it's definitely something that needs to be thought about, because we spoke about that too. And it's definitely something that needs to be unpacked, because when you actually think about it in the way you just put it, when you correlate toxic masculinity and then also see the number 1 killer of men is men, like a suicide, like ourselves, it does make you think a little bit, do you know what I mean, or like raise your eyebrow.
It's like it's not working for most of society, and yet so many women they obviously want to fight the battle that they see as quite gendered. You look at the statistic for how many rape cases which are successfully prosecuted is 1.6% in the UK, and 10 years ago it was 6%. But when it's 1.6%, I think you're sending out a real message to women, which is nobody cares, but also to men, because you're saying it's okay.
Get away with it as well.
Yeah, you can just get away with it. It's barely, it's like you're not going to go to jail.
Nothing's going to happen to you.
Nothing will happen. In fact, your mates might even have a good laugh. It's like, and so I can see why so many women are so angry, because it's impossible to even say that without feeling really angry, isn't it? So I think it's society that has to change.
Definitely. Do you have any advice for people that want to actively be a part of the change, not just raise awareness? Because you said challenge toxic masculinity, but do you have any advice for someone who's like watching, that's like, but what can I do? What can I do?
Nothing below. And also not, you know, none of us kind of I don't think we know what we're doing, do we? I mean, to make the work, I needed the help of a national charity. So they work in this field. There are many, many, many of them within that organisation, and they're all experts in their own field. So for me, I think you join something bigger than yourself, and that might be. I mean, if you live in South Manchester, I've been helping the Women's Food Bank. They're kind of more than a food bank. They do a lot of other things for women, and that's called Emmeline's Pantry.
Okay.
And so at a practical level, you can simply start to offer volunteer hours. You know, it's if Karen says they need a bed for a child, it's not so hard to find a bit of money to help, but a lot of the time the help I give is, you know, there's big shipments of clothing come in, and they need someone to sort it out, really. So I work with one of the women there sometimes. She's got hip problems, she can't bend over, so my job is to bend over, pull the things out, hold it up, and she's the one who decides whether that works for their women and it goes on the rail or not. So joining something bigger than yourself, yeah, whether it's just to donate cash or a bit of time. So when they moved premises, they used to be in the basement of the Pankhurst Centre, and now Emmeline, as in Emmeline Pankhurst. So now they've got a really nice space, but they needed DIY people, and I'm rubbish. So I just sent my husband and daughter and went, okay, you've got a help for a day, you know, like take your tools and you take a paintbrush. You're an art student, you can paint. Yeah. I think someone thinks it's lunchtime.
But yeah, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your experiences, things that you've been through personally, like your talent as well, and your insight as well. Like, it's much appreciated.
You're welcome.
Definitely.
I don't think I know that much. I think I'm still finding out loads of things.
But that's all we are ever doing, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's nice to know that you don't know.
No, I don't know.
And it's just a rabbit hole that you go down.
Yeah.
And when it's for a good cause of trying to be a part of change rather than just talking about it, I think it's super important. That's the journey I'm on.
Yeah.
And we're all at different parts of the journey, but it's about one step in front of the other. Do you know what I mean?
It's also accepting your way backwards and forwards and round in circles for me. That's, you know, it's not like we're born knowing what the right thing to do is it? We're just trying to make the world a bit better, people like you and me.
Definitely. Hey, gorgeous. Anyway, guys, thank you for tuning in. I'm going to post a little bit of information for anybody that wants to be a part of the change or wants to find a little bit of information about anything. I'm going to post Allie's website as well if you want to get in touch or have a look at her work. But yeah, this is another episode for Why Not I WODCAST, and let's give you Awareness Month. Peace.